All right, Rabosai, good morning. Let us begin. So first, let's begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for Adar Aleph, to thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah ben Zechariah and Dinah bas Rab Dov. To thank Art and Sherry Miller for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in loving memory of Art's brother, Richard Miller, Reuven ben Betzalel V'Rachel. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Ayal and Sarah Steinberg, for the Refuah Shlema of Shulamis Bas Susha. Our day of learning sponsors, Adam and Leslie Rosen, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Adam's grandfather, Todrus ben Shlomo Zalman Zichron Livracha. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gabi and Shana Cohn, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gabi's grandfather, Alvin Cohn, Avram ben Rabbi Yaakov HaKohen Zichron Livracha. And to thank Ellen Kehan Zager for dedicating the shir today in memory of her father, Sammy Kehan, Reb Shlomo HaKohen, Zichron Lebracha, whose love of learning defined him on his yahrzeit, the 26th of Adar. Incredible. Also to thank one additional sponsor today, to thank Tali and Michelle Strum for dedicating the daf this morning in honor of the Siddur party of their oldest grandchild, Adira. Mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, she be makabeler. Siddur b'simcha, and Emir Hashem, all of our should be Ola Ad L'Rakia. All right, with that, I think that's our first Siddur party dedication in the history of the. So beautiful, so beautiful. All right, so with that, let us begin with a beautiful daf. I had about to say I should talk to Rav Kalman Akiva for the beautiful shir yesterday. We are beginning on Daf Yod Ches Amud Aleph. We are picking up 10 lines down. So a little bit kind of mid-sugya. So remember again, the Gemara says, Michlal de Tarvayu Sfir Luhu Decholo Shamoid Aser Ba'asiyas Melocha. So the Gemara explains over here that, picking up on yesterday's conversations, that both according to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, both opinions hold that halacha lamaisa during Chalamayid, one is not permitted to perform any level of malacha. So the Gemara says, Minhanim, I will say this in general is an interesting discussion. Because Chalamayid, remember again, one need not look any further than the name to understand how much difficulty and almost inherent contradiction occurs during these days. Chol hamoid. Right? So there are days that are chol. Chol means mundane. Moed, moed itself just means a convocation, right? Moed just means an appointed time. But generally, again, for our purposes, moed has a connotation of Yom Tov. So which one is it? Is it a chol? Is it a moed? And the answer is yes, right? The answer is that chalamayid, I will say, you should know in general, chalamayid, I've always felt, is the time that really captures the essence of the Jew. Because isn't every day, to a certain degree, chalamayid, right? Isn't that my goal? Isn't that my aspiration in life? To take the chal, to take that which is mundane, and ultimately extract and uplift, or extract the holiness, and therefore uplift the mundane by finding something holy within it. But nevertheless, the Gemara says that everyone agrees that chalamayid is asr ba'asiyas malchi. You're not allowed to do malacha on chalamayid. So the Gemara says, minhanim really. So from where do you know that you're not allowed to do malacha on chalamayid? So the Gemara says, the Tana Rabbanon, es chag hamatzos tishmor shivas yomim. Torah says you should go and observe chag hamatzos for 7 days. Limeid al cholos shamoid sha'asr ba'asiyas malacha divrei Rabbi Yoshia. So we'll say from that pasuk, obviously it's a much longer drasha than what the Gemara is highlighting over here. But from the fact that the pasuk says, es chag hamatzos tishmor shivas yomim, that teaches us that chalamayid, one is not permitted to go ahead and do malacha. We're using this one? Not this one? Okay. Good. Perfect. So I'll say, remember when like shir just used to be shir? You know, people would show up, they would learn. If you came, you didn't. All right, thank you. Should I take that? I feel chashuv. So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, limeid al cholo shamoed sha'asr ba'asiyas malacha divrei Rabbi Yoshia. So we'll say the Gemara says as follows. That Allah Chalamaisa, we learn from here that Chalamai you're not allowed to do malacha. And if you look at Rashi says Zomas Tishma Shabas Yamim, limeid al cholo shamoed sha'asr ba'asiyas malacha darish bei es chag hamatzos tishmar v'chal tishmar as haras lo sasi. Okay, so we're again. This is not really our primary sugi right now, so we're not going to delve into the complexities of the drush. It's to say, the Gemara learns out from this pasuk that you're not allowed to do malacha on chalamayid. Div Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonasan Omer, Einot Sarich. Rabbi Yonasan says says, I don't need a pasuk. Why not? It's a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Umar rishon ushvi'i shin kedusha lifnein ulacharein aser basias melacha. Now both say the first day and the seventh day of Pesach, which have no kedusha prior to them. In other words, they both say the first day, right? The first day of Yom, the first day of Pesach, kedusha before it. The seventh day of Pesach, we're going to see when the Gemara says doesn't have kedusha before it, means the day before the seventh day of Pesach is not a complete Yom Tiv. And yet days 1 and day 7, one is not allowed to do malacha. Then certainly again, Chalamayid, which I will say does have Kiddusha, but before it is what? Day 1. After it is day 7. Certainly again it should be Asar Basiyas Malacha. There should be a prohibition of Malacha. The Gemara says, here's the problem with that Kal V'chomer. It doesn't work because look at the 6 days of creation. How so? Sheyesh Kiddusha Lifnehen Ula Acharein. But this is actually very interesting. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Have Kiddusha before it, right? Shabbos before it, and have Shabbos that comes after it. And yet, Umutarin Ba'asiyas Malacha. And ultimately, again, 6 days, right? Not only are the 6 days of the week mutter ba'asiyas, but what? There is an obligation. This beautiful Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes says, Sheishes Yamim Tasa Malachtecha Ubeyom Hashvi Shabbos. So the Sfas Emes says people don't understand. People look Sheishes Yamim Tasa Malachtecha, for 6 days you shall do your work, and look at that as a heter malacha, right? It's a heter to work during the 6 days of the week, and Shabbos not to work. Sfas Emes says, no, it's not a heter, it's a mitzvah. It's a tzivui. Work hard during your week. Whatever it is that you do in life, work hard. Work hard. By the way, I will say, this applies to even a person who Baruch Hashem has a schus to learn from, right? Whatever you do during the week, you have to work hard. The thing is taking it easy. Sheishes yamim tasam latecha means be a hard worker in life. You're a professional, work hard in your profession. You're a learner, work hard in your learning. Whatever you do, give it 1,000%. There's no such thing as strolling through life. There's no such thing as taking it easy. We take it easy after 120. You have an eternity to take it easy after that. But while we're alive, each and every day, work hard, put in your effort. Only those who work hard during the 6 days of the week really get to enjoy what Shabbos truly is. So the idea over here is Shabbos is different. Okay, 6 days during the week are different. They don't have a carbon musaf. Tomar b'cholol shamoid sheyesh bo carbon musaf. Chalamayid has a carbon musaf. So we'll say, so according to this limud, it's interesting. So Chalamayid has Kiddusha before it, that's day 1. Kiddusha after, that's day 7. Carbon musaf, that's each and every day. So you put all of that together, and ultimately that creates, at least according to Rabbi Yona's son, that creates the Isser Malacha on Chalamayid. Rosh Chodesh Yochiach, but Rosh Chodesh could destroy that Kal V'chomer. How so? Sheyesh bo Karban Musaf, because Rosh Chodesh does have a Karban Musaf, right? Umutar ba'asiyas Malacha, but yet again, there's no Isser Malacha on Rosh Chodesh. You're allowed to do Malacha. To which the Gemara says, here's the difference. Mal Rosh Chodesh she'ein karoi mikra Kodesh. Rosh Chodesh is never called the Mikra Kodesh. It's never called the Holy Convocation. Tomar b'cholo shal moed karai Mikra Kodesh. Chalamayid is called Mikra Kodesh. So we'll say, so what you begin to see is we're adding like a lot of stuff on top of this. So first of all, again, there's an Isser Malacha on day 1, Isser Malacha on day 7. Chalamayid is sandwiched in between, right? So you have before Isser Malacha, after Isser Malacha, now we have a Karban Musaf on Chalamayid. Now it's also called Mikra Kodesh. So you begin to see we're putting all of these things together in order to arrive at the conclusion that there is an Isser Asiyas Malacha. One is not allowed to do Malacha on Chalamayid as well. I says in the Gemara, one second. Hol v'kar Mikra Kodesh dinhu shasar b'asiyas Malacha. And once it's called Mikra Kodesh, right? It's really, once it's called Mikra Kodesh, plus all of these other things. And in addition to that, it's sandwiched in between days 1 and day 7 where there isn't Isser Malacha. All of that together, but the primary piece being that it's called Mikra Kodesh, It's enough to tell you that on Chol Hamoed one is not permitted to go ahead and do malacha. Tanya idach of another brayso, kol malachas avoda lo sasu. But say you can't do any malacha. Any malachas avoda you can't do. Limeid al chol al shamoed she'asher b'asiyas malachas Rabbi Yossi Lili. So what Rabbi Yossi Lili learns out from the pasuk of kol malachas avoda lo sasu. You're not allowed to do any malacha. He learns out from there that halacha lamaisa. You can't do malacha and Chol Hamoed. Now, boss, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi points out over here, "Kamalacha savoda lo sasu, amichlei shivas yom takriv yishal Hashem." So, boss says, remember again, right next to that pasuk, that you can't do any malacha, is a pasuk that talks about all 7 days of Pesach. You're not allowed to do malacha. Or I should say, all 7 days of Pesach, you have to offer up a carbon, excuse me. So the Gemara says, Limida chol shamoid, v'hachi darish, I'm reading Rashi, lo sasu shivas yomim, u'bechag asukos ksiva. Excuse me, I made a mistake. Not Pesach, but by Sukkis. V'aleh kaima hachmas nisa v'taras kohanim. Shabbos, I hear a little bit of a different drasha. Here, the Gemara sees a juxtaposition to the phrase, kol meleches avoda losu, and right after that it speaks about the 7 days of Sukkis. So the juxtaposition of the Isra Malacha to a discussion of all 7 days tells me that when does the Isra Malacha apply on Sukkot? To when? All 7 days. And all 7 days by definition includes Chol Hamoed. Beautiful. David Rabbi Yossi Lili. These are the words of Rabbi Yossi Lili. Rabbi Kiva says, no, I don't need this drasha. Ain't no tzarech. Harehu Omer Eile Moadei Hashem. The pasuk says, these are the Moadim of Hashem. B'ma'akas of Medaber. Now, what is the pasuk referring to? Im berishon harikvar ne'emar shavason. If it's talking about the first day of Yom Tov, Torah already calls the first day of Yom Tov Shabboson. Im b'shvi'i, if it's talking about the 7th day of Yom Tov, harikvar ne'emar Shabboson. Shabbos say the Torah explicitly calls days 1 and day 7. Day 1 and day 7 of Yom Tov Shabboson. The Rabbos say we know what does Shabboson automatically mean. What does Shabboson mean? No malacha. No malacha. Okay. So I'll say, so watch what's happening over here. Right? So Rabbi Akiva says like this. Rabbi Akiva says, the Torah gives me a phrase, Eile Moadei Hashem. These are the Moadim, the Yomim Tovim of Hashem. So again, we're assuming that whatever is called a Moed carries with it an Isra Malacha. So what is it referring to? If it's referring to days 1 or 7 of Yom Tiv, I don't need that pasuk. Why? Because it already calls those days Shabboson, which means a cessation from Malacha. So therefore, what? Ha'ina kasav medaber elo b'cholol shamoed. Ultimately, again, the pasuk Eile Moadei Hashem must be talking about Chol Hamoed l'lamdecha she'asar ba'asiyas malacha, and it's teaching us ultimately again that Allah Chol there is an Isser Asiyas Malacha by these days of Chol Hamoed. Beautiful. Tanya Idach was another brayso. Sheishes Yamim, first wide line on Chesam Daleth. Sheishes Yamim Tocha Matzos. Ubayom HaShvi'i Atzeres LaHashem. The pasuk says, for 6 days you shall eat matzah, and on the 7th day it'll be an Atzeres. We'll say Atzeres also means Atzeres. Or if it translates Atzeres as a yomtiv, but the truth is the real etymological root of Atzeres is Atzur, a stoppage, right? Which also again refers to Malacha. So the Torah says that the 7th day is an Atzeres. So just like on the 7th day Atzur, I have to stop doing Malacha, Av Sheishes Yomim Atzurin. So too for the previous days, because you're saying in this pasuk, the Torah is linking the 6 days of Pesach with the 7th day of Pesach. It's calling the 7th day of Pesach, ultimately again in Atzeres, right? Telling you just like on the 7th day of Pesach, you can't go ahead and, just like on the 7th day of Pesach, you can't do Malacha. So too again on the previous days, you can't do Malacha as well. Ima Shvi'i Atzur B'chol Malacha. Well, we'll say if you're doing that, then Halacha L'maisa would say, just as like on the 7th day, you can't do any malacha. Av sheishes yomim atzur malacha. Shabbos say, if that's the drasha, maybe I would say like this. Just like on day number 7, you're not allowed to do any malacha. Then we'll say, that's not, when we say any malacha, we know it's not totally true. In other words, remember, it's Yom Tov. So what are you allowed to do? Ochal nefesh. But again, bigadol, so to speak. In a general sense. You're not allowed to do malacha. Av malacha. So too again, for 6 days, I would think you're not allowed to do any malacha. In other words, we'll say maybe Here's what's interesting. Remember, everyone's agreeing on one central point. Everyone, right? We have harbe drachim l'makom. Right? There are many different pathways to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are many different pathways to this conclusion, but the conclusion is agreed upon, which is you're not allowed to do malacha on Chalamayid. So the Gemara said, well, 1 second, maybe what that means is you can't do any malacha on Chalamayid. Because remember, at this point in time, that what we're doing is we're comparing the Pesach to the 7th day of Pesach. Just like the 7th day of Pesach is in Atzeres, so the previous 6 days, which include Chalamayid, are in Atzeres. Oh, well, maybe that means that you mamish can't do any malacha. To which the Gemara says, "Ima shvi atzor b'chol malacha." So af sheishes yamim atzurim b'chol malacha. So maybe just like the 7th day, there is a complete and complete malacha. You can't do anything on day number 7. Maybe that's true on Chalamayid as well. TALMUD lomar ubayom hashvi atzeres hashvi atzor b'chol malacha. The 7th day is asur by all shisha yamim b'chol malacha. I'm sorry, bein shisha yamin atzurim b'chol malacha. But the previous 6 days, which are not asur in all malacha. Well, remember again, the first day of Yom Tiv has its own limud, right? It has its own teaching. So the Gemara said, "Lo masna kasav elo lechachamim lomar lecha eiza yom asur ve'eiza yom muter eiza malacha asura ve'eiza malacha muteres." Also are asr b'malacha. Again, take your pick from the drashas, right? We have a whole variety of drashas. But the conclusion is the same, which is you can't do malacha on Chalamayid. I will say, what's missing from the picture? What's missing from the picture? What types of malacha can't I do on Chalamayid? Right? What types of malacha? To which the Gemara says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the framework. Chalamayid should be not a regular chol. Also doesn't have to be a complete moed. So some things are asr, some things are mutter, and he left it in the hands of Chazal to determine what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do on Chalamayid. Take a look at Rashi. Hare lo masran hakasav ela chachamim kilomar me'achar she'amal hakasav she'en atzurim mimalacha v'lo b'kulan. See, also here's what's interesting. So the Torah tells me that Chalamayid is atzurin b'malacha, which means I'm not allowed to do malacha. But the Torah does, but yet it doesn't, not all malacha is aser, only some malacha is aser. V'lo perish, and yet the Torah doesn't tell me, Eiza hamuteres, ve'eiza asura, right? Which is aser, which is mutter. Da ure'ei shalom masron ela lechachamim hayodim lahavin, al eiza lahatil laheter, eiza lahatil ha'iser. So Kadosh Baruch Hu left this to Chazal to determine what are you allowed to do on Chalamayid, what are you not allowed to do on Chalamayid. Ve'heim yomru eize yom tov api kiddush hariyah v'asr b'chol malacha ve'eize chol shamoid she'eino asr b'chol malacha v'chol shamoid. So Rashi says the Gemara is saying even something more profound. Remember, the entire essence of Yom Tiv is in the hands of Chazal, right? In the hands of the Rabbanon, right? How so? Because remember again, how to establish when Yom Tiv is? Based on the calendar, right? So you have to establish the calendar, and then ultimately again you establish Yom Tiv. So Chazal established the calendar, thereby established the dates of Yom Tiv, thereby telling you what's the first day, what's the 7th day, what's Chalamayid, and then in Chalamayid itself, Chazal will tell us what we're allowed to do, we're not allowed to do. So by the way, this notion that Yom Tiv really is based on the power of Chazal is reflected in Kiddush. Remember again, how do we end Kiddush on Mekadesh Yisrael? And again, whatever it is. Right? Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. Right? Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. Mekadesh Yisrael, and again, whatever it is. Right? Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. Right? Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. Why Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim? Because again, Mekadesh Yisrael means Chazal established the calendar. And once the rabbis establish the calendar, then Hazmanim, then Yom Tov, as opposed to Shabbos. How do we go ahead and conclude Kiddush on Shabbos? Baruch atah Hashem, Mekadesh HaShabbos. Why? Because Shabbos is de facto Kiddusha. Right? Shabbos at the end of the day has nothing to do with me. In other words, I make Kiddush, that's a mitzvah that I have, but Lamaisa, we just did this in Smichas Chaver, the Kiddusha of Shabbos is a de facto Kiddusha. It begins when the sun goes down on Friday, and it ends when 3 stars emerge on Matzei Shabbos, whether I do anything or not. It's an incredible yisod. So therefore, again, Rashi is pointing out over here, it's not just the pshat that the definition of Malacha and Chalamayid was given over into the hands of Chazal. Essentially, the entirety of Yom Tov is given over into the hands of Chazal. The entirety of Yom Tov. Rashi fishes up. He says, "V'acholo shama yagid lecha," and about Chalamayid, Rashi says, Chazal will tell us, "Eizu malacha asura davar she'eno avid ve'eizu malacha mutaris davar avid." Abosai going back, hearkening back to our Moed Katan days, right, to the beginning of Moed Katan, right, about Beis HaShalch, and that's how we started out, Moed Katan, the halachas of davar avid on Chalamayid. So it's absolutely amazing. So therefore, again, what comes out, the conclusion of the sugya is, there is an Isser Malacha on Chalamayid. What is the Isser Malacha on Chalamayid? So again, that's up to Chazal to define the scope and parameter. Again, we saw much of this already in Maseches Moed Katan, that essentially, on Chalamayid, obviously Ochel Nefesh is permitted, but again, otherwise, general Malacha is not permitted, right? Unless, of course, you're talking about a Davar Avid, encountering the law. So we'll say it's just incredible to see. It's absolutely incredible to see how, and this is such a contrast, right? Think about this for just a moment, right? The parashas that we're in now, right? We're about to this week, we're zocha to finish Chumash Shmos, so Pekudei. So we say Truma, Titzav, Vayakel Pekudei. So many details, right? Regarding a structure that we will never ever have again, right? There's never, I have mentioned this, there's never going to be another Mishkan. It's not the pshat when Mashiach comes. Chalash Baruch is going to say, you know what? We have some construction delays, right? There's what is it? Supply chain disruption, right? So we're gonna, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer. Here's a mishkan to hold you over. There's no such thing. All the details, every last detail, more details than you ever want to know about the mishkan, right? You've got in these parashiyos, and yet Chalamayid, I say Yom Tiv, which is such a fixture to our lives. What's Aser? What's Mutter? I don't know. I don't know. We know that there's an Isser Malacha. At the end of the day, but Chazal have to figure out what's mutter, what's aser. It's incredible to see what HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to go into great detail about, and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to go ahead and obscure the details. When you ask yourself, so why would the Ribono Shel Olam give us a body of Torah that at the end of the day has ambiguity? Just tell us. You gave us 630 mitzvahs. Just give me the list. What could I do on Chalamayid? What can I do on Chalamayid? And Abba it goes back to what we just said before. Sheshes yamim tasa melachtecha. Hashem wants us to work on our ruchnius. You see, if everything was spelled out, you wouldn't have to labor over a sugya. If everything was spelled out, you wouldn't have to toil. Sure, it's always easier to have everything spelled out and delivered, right? Like spiritual Instacart, right? Just put in what you want, it'll show up at your doorstep. That would be great. Except that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from Ruchnius. Ruchnius is only meaningful if you have to work. If I just show up and everything is just put out there and I don't have to toil, there's no accomplishment in that. You could gain knowledge like that, but you can't gain greatness like that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu purposely causes certain things to be ambiguous and obscure because He wants us to work. He wants us to toil. Because when you work at something, when you toil on something, you become a partner in the process. Hashem does not want us to be spectators in our Torah. He wants us to be partners in our Torah. Such an incredible yisod. So also remember again, going back to the end of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah on Yud Zayin, yesterday's daf said that Yom Tevoach Achar Shabbos. So the Mishnah ended off by saying as follows. Remember, all the other Yom Tovim have tashlumin, right? There are days after Yom Tiv that you have the ability to make up any sacrificial things that you may have missed. So the Mishnah talks about as follows. The Mishnah says over here that Yom Tevoach was Achar HaShabbos, right? The Yom Tevoach for Shavuos, right? It was Achar Shabbos. So the Mishnah said, Umodim Shimchala Lichios B'Shabbos Sheyom Tevoach Achar HaShabbos. That Betzalel agreed that if Shavuos fell out on Shabbos, then what? The Yom Tevoach, what we call the slaughter day, which essentially is the makeup day, or choose not even the fully makeup day. Certain karbanos you can't offer up on Shabbos. You would offer up the karbanos of Shavuos on Sunday. However, When the Yom Tavoach fell out on Sunday, the Mishnah said, Ein kohen gadol mislabesh bekelov umutarin behaspidu b'tainis. Kohen gadol would not wear his clothing, regular clothing, outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and ultimately, again, the day would be permitted in eulogies and fasting. Why? Shalakayim ha'omrim atzeres achar Shabbos. Let's remember again, we saw this in yesterday's daf. There's an interesting dispute between the Tzedukim and the Prushim when it comes to Shavuos. The Torah says, "Umimacharas haShabbos," right? Usfartem lochem mimacharas haShabbos sheva Shabbosos timimos. Torah says, when counting between Pesach and Shavuos, you shall count 7 weeks. We who believe in Torah Shabbat Peh, understand that mimacharas haShabbos, the day after Shabbos, the Shabbos in question over here is referring to what? Referring to Pesach. The Tzedukim who did not believe in Torah Shabbat Peh understood that Mimacharas HaShabbos means Sunday, right? Shabbos means Shabbos, and so according to the Tzedukim, Shavuos always had to fall out on a Sunday. See, interestingly enough, we have a fascinating situation. Let's say you have a case where Shavuos really does fall out on a Shabbos. Therefore, the Yom Tavoach, the slaughter day, right, to go and offer up some of the karbanos, would have to be on Sunday. The concern we had in a situation like that is lending legitimacy to the halachic position of the tzdukim. In order to offset that, see, I'd offer up karbanos on that Sunday after Shavuos, but what we would do is we would say that Sunday was permitted in eulogies and fasting. Now, what happens when you permit eulogies and fasting on that Sunday? What does that show? That it's not a Yom Tiv. That it's not a Yom Tiv. Now, both say, normally we would not have eulogies and fasting on the sacrificial makeup day. We wouldn't do that. But because, again, we're concerned that if we don't allow that on this day, it will lend legitimacy to the position of the tzdukim, we allowed fasting and eulogies, which will say, it's so interesting, understanding what's happening. That Yom Tavoach, that slaughter day, does have sanctity. It does have sanctity. And you really shouldn't eulogize and fast on that day. But here's what's fascinating. Sometimes, in order to go ahead and uphold the legitimacy of Torah, you have to take shortcuts with certain things. It's almost is laso shem hefaru sarasecha. Sometimes, in order to uphold Torah, you have to take shortcuts. So let's remember again, we saw this back in Maseches Megillah. Megillah Moed Katan, right? Where was one of the first examples of this? By Boaz. Right? Boaz instituted greeting people with Megillah. M'shem Hashem, with the name of Hashem. Right? Boaz comes to the field, right? He says, Hashem imachem, v'yivarechecha, Hashem. Everybody's greeting each other. God this, hey God, what's that? God? All this stuff. Everybody's greeting each other with the name of God. We're greeting each other with the name of God. Where did this come from? Remember again, Boaz is the one who instituted the fact that today we say, Baruch Hashem, or Shalom Aleichem. The usage that comes from Boaz. You shouldn't do that. Throwing around the name of God in greeting someone. Boaz was the one who felt that people had forgotten about God. And therefore we had to reintroduce God into the day-to-day exchanges. We had to put God back on the map. Right? Make God great again. Right? We had to go ahead and bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu back into the day-to-day lives of people. So how do you do that? Introduce HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the greetings. Now, Rabbi said, that's not ideal. That's not ideal. But sometimes you have to do less than ideal things in order to go ahead and serve the greater good. So here's an example of this also. We're scared that if we treat that Sunday after Shavuos as a Yom Tiv, people are going to look at that as a win for the Baitusim. Therefore, again, what did we do? We tell people, give your karbanos, but you could also deliver eulogies and go ahead and fast on that day. So also an interesting story here. So the Gemara says, Va'itmar, Maisa umeis Alexa. Alexa died, right? Alexa died. Can you imagine how quiet the house is if Alexa dies? Right? So say, so Mace Alexa. Now, both in all seriousness, who is Alexa? Who is Alexa? So it's fascinating. So both say, so first of all, again, the Yerushalmi has a version where it's not Alexa, but it's Alexander. So again, it's a reference to Alexander the Great. Right? Remember again, Alexander the Great was very good to the Jews. So ultimately, again, many wanted to attend his Levaya. Others say it's actually interesting. There is an Amora who is quoted in a number of different places as Rebbe Alexa. Rabbi Alexa, he doesn't appear in the Bavli, appears in the Tosefta, and appears in the Yerushalmi. So quite fascinating. So either an Amora named Rabbi Alexa, or perhaps again just a little bit of a typo, and it's supposed to be Alexander. Okay, in any event, what happened? Ma'is Alexa belud. So Alexa died in Lud. V'nichnusu kol Yisrael sopto. And I will say, when was this happening? Apparently, again, this was happening on the day after Shavuos, what we would call the Yom Tovoach, the slaughter day. So everybody was coming in to eulogize him. Rabbi Tarfon prevented people from eulogizing because it was Yom Tov of Shavuos. Yom Tov of Shavuos. Yom Tov Sagadaitcha. So I will say again, Yom Tov. This was a Levaya in Yom Tov. Ibi Yom Tov Mika Asu. I will say if it was a Yom Tov, how? So I will say. So again, remember, this also depends. See, if it was Alexander the Great, Alexander's Levaya could have been on Yom Tov. If, however, again, it was Rabbi Alexa and Amora, would he have a Levaya on Yom Tov? But I will say, even if it was Alexander the Great, the Pashtus Jews wouldn't be coming to a Levaya on Yom Tov, right? Even if Alexander the Great would be coming for Yom Tov. So how could you tell me it's on Yom Tov? Ela bipnei sheyom tevoach haya. Oh, it wasn't Yom Tov. It wasn't Yom Tov. What was it, Rabbi say? It was what we call Isru Chag, the day after Shavuos, which again we know again from a sacrificial perspective has sanctity because it is the day in which you could offer up the karbanos of Shavuos. Shavuos say, what do you see from here? That's a contradiction. Because what did we just say? Our Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and offer up, the day after Shavuos, you're offering up karbanos, right? The karbanos of Shavuos. And I will say, we know that halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah said, you're allowed to eulogize on that day. So why is Rabbi Tarfon not allowing them to eulogize on this day? What's going on over here? Lo kasha, it's not a contradiction. Here we go. Kan biyom tov shechalios achar Shabbos. Kan biyom tov shechalios b'Shabbos. Rabbi say this is actually quite fascinating. When did Chazal allow you to go ahead and eulogize after Yom Tiv? After Yom Tiv, Rabbi say that was in a very specific situation when Shavuos fell out on Shabbos and the Yom Tovach is on Sunday. That's when. So I'll say, let's take a step back for just a moment. Isru Chag, the day after Yom Tiv, does have a quasi kedusha associated with it, and especially on Shavuos, that is a clear makeup day. So let's remember again, on the other Yomim Tovim, you have a Chalamayid, right? So Pesach, whatever you don't get to do on the first day, you could do on Chalamayid. Sukkot, whatever you don't get to do on the first day, you could do on Chalamayid. Shavuos is unique like this because Shavuos is only one day. So Lamais, you have the Yom Tovach, the day after Shavuos. So Chazal only said, we want you, so to speak, to eulogize and fast on the day after Shavuos in a very specific situation, which is when Shavuos falls out on a Shabbos, and then we'll call the Yom Tavoach or Isru Chag falls out on a Sunday. That's when we're concerned that if you treat that day with any level of Kedusha, it lends legitimacy to the position of the Tzdukim. But if Halacha L'Maisa, Shavuos falls out on any other day of the week, then what? What's the status of the Yom Tavoach? What's the status? Isru Chag. Isru Chag, and therefore what? No eulogies and no fasting. So it must have been, the Gemara says, that Rabbi Tarfon didn't allow them to eulogize. It must have been where the Yom Tovach, the Isru Chag, the day after Shavuos, was a different day of the week. It wasn't a Shabbos Sunday setup. Look at Rashi. Yom Tov Shechalios b'Shabbos, Sheyom Tovach Achra Shabbos, Muter behesped, Mipnei Omrim Atzeres Achar Shabbos, V'hai Alexa belud, Yom Tov Shechalios b'Cholhu, then Yom Tovach Shalom Yom Echad b'Shabbos. So also it must have been that when Alexa died, Rabbi Alexa or Alexander, when they died, ultimately the Levaya was on the day after Shavuos, but it wasn't a Sunday. It wasn't a Sunday. So I will say, when you have a situation that halacha l'maisa, the day after Shavuos falls out on the day of the week, other than a Sunday, there will be an isser to go ahead and deliver eulogies and fast. I will say, rather, this also seems to be a raya that it can't really be a reference to Alexander. It must be a reference to Rabbi Alexa, because otherwise, how would Rabbi Tarfon have power over eulogies? Unless, of course, it's talking about a situation where Alexander the Great died, and Jews gathered by themselves, not at the Levaya, to eulogize the king. Okay, either way, I will say, what comes out of here is as follows, that the Mishnah's halacha that you're allowed to go ahead and eulogize and fast on the Yom Tovach, the day after Shavuos, is dafka only when what? when Shavuos is a Sunday and the Shavuos is a Shabbos and the Yom Tov is a Sunday. We purposely downgrade the holiness of that Yom Tov so as not to lend legitimacy to the erroneous halachic positions of the Tzedukim. However, when Shavuos falls out on any other day of the week, and therefore the Yom Tov is any other day other than a Sunday or obviously a Shabbos, then Allah said that day has a quasi-sanctity attached to it, and therefore fasting and eulogizing will be asr. Well, say there's a whole discussion here also, not our topic for today, but understand, Shavuos actually, we saw this actually earlier in the Sugya, Shavuos actually doesn't just have a 1-day makeup period, but Shavuos actually has a 7-day makeup period afterwards also, which is why for our purposes, interestingly enough, no one says Tachanun on Isru Chag, right, on the day after Shavuos, what we would call the Yom Tovach. But Allah said there is a minhag not to say Tachanun, and many abide by this minhag, right? Many hold by this minhag. Many are machmir on the minhag to include the extra week, right? So not to say Tachanun for that entire week after Shavuos as well. Good. We'll say this brings to a conclusion our sugya. We'll say now we come to a really incredible new sugya, and it's some halachos of Tuman Tara. Now, don't get nervous. This is friendly Tuman Tara, exciting Tuman Tara. Right? I will say again, and remember, understand, when you learn these sugyas, we'll say sometimes, room for honor, sometimes when we see Tuman Tara, we tend to not zone out, but just, get a little bit nervous, right? Tense up a bit. Oh, when is it going to be? Maybe we flip forward a couple of pages. All right, so this is going to be with us for a little while. Tuman Tara, but I will say, but understand, when we learn the halachos of Tuman Tara, remember again, I will say, these are the halachos that are applicable during Mashiach. So just understand that what we're doing is we are preparing ourselves for the Geula. When I learn Tuman Tara, I will say, and I make a goal, let's really try to understand these sugyas. When I try to understand that was when Mashiach comes and everyone else is scrambling to figure out how to eat this or how to do this or how to conduct themselves in this situation, we will, in Meretz Hashem, be ready. We will be ready to go ahead and master. We'll be ready. We'll be ready to conduct ourselves just in daily life. So let's see the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Noten le'adayim l'chulin u'lemaiser l'truma. So say, now we're actually starting out with an interesting discussion here. So we're going to see that there is a type of. See, normally when we speak about tevila, when we speak about immersion, so immersion usually means the entire body. There is we'll call netilas yadayim. Netilas yadayim, which literally means, or it should say tevilas yadayim, an immersion of the hands. So there is a concept in halacha that yadayim askanios, right? The hands are all over the place. In other words, I touch things that may be unclean or impure without even realizing that I've touched something. So there's a concept, therefore, that before partaking of anything that has some level of sanctity, so halacha l'maisa, one is supposed to go ahead and immerse their hands. Now, this is a rabbinic concept. Because mid'oraisa, there's no such concept of just immersing your hands. Either what? Either you immerse what? Your body or nothing. There's no such thing as a quasi-immersion. So note adayim lechulin ulamaisa l'truma. So Rabbi Say the Mishnah says, I wash, literally means I wash my hands. But we're going to, of course, this means in a mikvah. I wash my hands for chulin, for meiser, and for truma. Rabbi Say meiser in this context means meiser sheni. Right? Remember again, Meiser Sheni is the tithe that I separate, and I go ahead and take it to Yerushalayim to consume it there. So I wash my hands for Chulin, we'll discuss why for Chulin, for Meiser Sheni, and for Truma. Truma is the portion, of course, that is given to the Kohen. Look at Rashi. Notli adayim lechulin Meiser leTruma, Tailahem benetila dekli, she'ein bo ela revius mayim. And Abba said, we're talking about over here that it is enough to go ahead and simply wash my hands. Right? I don't have to immerse in the mikvah, but I can wash my hands with a utensil that holds at least a revius of water. Ula kodesh matbilin. However, for kodesh, we'll say, now what's kodesh? Rashi says over here, abalech ol shlamim, ol chatos, ve'asham, lekohanim, yesh mayla shetzarech lahat b'yadayim ba'arba'im sa'ah. V'afapi she'inon elastam yadayim shlo noga b'tumah doraisat amatam es kologov. So I will say for Kedusha, if you want to partake of karbanos, that requires me to what? To go ahead and immerse my hands in a mikvah. So watch, you're going to see a progression. So to eat chulin, to eat meiser sheni, and for a kohen to eat truma, all I need to do is to wash my hands with a kli that holds at least the revius. If I go ahead and I want to eat sacrificial items, that requires immersion of my hands into a mikvah. Lechatos, I will say chatos in this context means to touch waters of para aduma, right? What we call mechatos. Remember again, a person comes in contact with the dead. In order to go ahead and rid oneself of that ritual impurity, you take the para aduma, you slaughter it, you burn it, you reduce it to ashes, you mix the ash with spring water. That concoction, that mixture is sprinkled upon the person who has contracted a ritual impurity, and that's how they become tar. Now, Bosai, in order to handle mechatas, waters of para aduma, im nitmu yadav nitma gufo. When it comes to paraduma, Bosai, if your hands become tamei, your entire body becomes tamei. Rashi says over here, lechatos liga b'mechatos hamayim hamukdashim be'efer para lahazos min al tamei mesim yeshmaili yisera shenitmu yadav ba'achas min advarim hamitam min asayadayim v'lo asaguf kigon vlad shatuma kigon sefer b'chol tumas shediv sefer. So Bosai, salach alamayis, we're going to see. Let's say we know this already. The greater the sanctity of an item, the more sensitive it is to impurity. So therefore, again, for example, when it comes to mechatos, if halacha l'maisa, my hands become ritually impure, even with a very low grade tumah, the entire body becomes tameh and requires an immersion before handling the mechatos. Good. Taval. So we'll say, so those are our categories. The category working from lowest to highest. So therefore, again, chulin, meiser sheni, truma. Assuming that I know myself to be ritually pure. The only thing I need to do before I partake of those items is what? Wash my hands. Wash my hands from what? From what? A kli, a utensil. Next level up. So kodesh, if I want to partake of karbanos, right? And I know myself to be ritually pure. What do I need to do in order to partake of the karbanos? Immerse my hands in a mikvah, right? What we call tevilas yadayim. Immerse my hands in a mikvah. Now, next category, highest category, chatos. If I want to handle the waters of paraduma, what do I have to do? Pretty much what do I have to do? I have to go to the mikvah, right? Because if I assume that maybe my hands have any level of ritual impurity, then Allah I have to go to the mikvah before handling the waters of the paraduma. Next, tavel lemaiser. So now we're switching gears. I go to the mikvah. So we'll say, let's say I go to the mikvah, taval l'maiser. We'll say, it's one of the things. It's interesting, it's one of the things that we miss out with not having the Beis Hamikdash is the mikvah, right? And sometimes again the role, we think about mikvah, we think about for women, but the truth is the mikvah plays such an important role in a man's life as well. This has been a little bit lost in the absence of the Beis Hamikdash. So again, so some of us go to the mikveh every Erev Shabbos, if not every Erev Shabbos, at least before Yomim Noraim. And, we forget the power of a mikveh for a man as well. Just the ability to be tovel, the ability to immerse oneself, and the cathartic effect that has upon an individual. So when Mashiach comes, Tefillah is going to, once again, not just for men, Tefillah for men is going to become such an important part of our lives. So tavel lemaiser. So now listen to this. Let's say a person went to the mikvah, and a man went to the mikvah with the intention of eating meiser sheni. Hochzak lemeiser, asla truma. So we'll say the lashon over here is as follows. Tavel means you go to the mikvah. Hochzak means your intention. So I go to the mikvah for the purposes of eating meiser sheni, right? Even though we'll say, do you have to go to the mikvah before eating meiser sheni? No. What do you have to do? Wash your hands. So okay, but the case over here is a person went to the mikvah. So I went to the mikvah to eat meiser sheni. That didn't sound right. I didn't go to the mikvah. I went to the mikvah in order to ready myself. Although I'll tell you, my boys tell me they go to the mikvah Erev Shabbos. One of the mikvahs they use, right, when you come out of the mikvah, they have a bakery and like a kugel shop. I'm like, I just hope people get dressed before they buy something, right? That's my only, right? That's the only, right? But again, this is the beauty of not having a health department, right? So again, and just interesting stories. In any event, so over here the Gemara says tava lemaiser, hochzak lemaiser. So I go to the mikvah in order to go ahead and eat meiser sheni, hochzak lemaiser, and my intention ultimately again is to eat meiser sheni. Asr truma. I can't, based on that tvila, eat truma. So this is really something quite fascinating. I know I skipped I skipped. I'm sorry. Taba l'chulin, hochzak l'chulin, asla ma'aser. Well, I went to the mikvah for the purpose of eating chulin, and then what happened? My kavana was to eat chulin. I'm not allowed to go ahead and eat ma'aser based on that tefillah. Look at Rashi. Asr l'ma'aser, hochzak lashon kavana, klomer niskavin lahamid gufa bechezka start l'chulin. So I'll say this is really interesting. So what the Gemara Mishnah is teaching me is as follows: if I go to the mikvah with the intention to ready myself for something, that explicit intention precludes me from doing something else. So if I went to the mikvah for the purposes of going ahead and eating chulin, that tevilah, that immersion does not allow me to go ahead and consume ma'aser sheni. Tava l'ma'aser, hochsak l'ma'aser. If I went to the mikvah for the purposes of eating